Hello, Keith Rucker here at VintageMachinery.org. Guys, today we're back to working on our Monarch 10EE lathe restoration that I'm trying to get knocked out over there. And before I can really put this thing back together, I need to do some work to the saddle here as far as some scraping goes. In a previous episode, we had done some inspecting work on this machine and basically determined that the ways on the cross slide are worn. There's a pretty good little dip in them, and want to try to get that straightened out while we got things apart and go ahead and make sure this cross slide is in really good shape. The ways on the machine itself are in pretty good shape. The bottom of the saddle's in pretty good shape, but this area here, it needs some work. Of course, that's where you get a lot of movement back and forth. So today, I want to work on getting these ways scraped back flat and parallel to one another or on the same plane as one another so that we can get this thing built out and put back together. So without further ado, let's get in here and let's get to work. So when I was doing my inspecting work, I came in here and did some measurements on this to determine, how even everything is or whatever. So we use this top surface on the cross slide kind of as a reference surface. It's not a perfect reference surface. For the most part, this is an area that hasn't seen any wear. However, you can tell that this side over here, which is the side closest to the lathe where most of the downward pressure is, there is a little bit of wear right here, so that probably impacted our measurements a little bit, but we will straighten that out with the straight edge here once we get this surface flat. But basically, if you look here at the ends, I measured out, both of these were, I got 75 is my measurement here. This is in 10 thousandths, so 75 10 thousandths, and it's a relative measurement. It's not I just kind of read the last two numbers on my micrometers. 7.5 thousandths was what it was, and if you notice, they're the same on both sides here. That's measuring from the top down. But as we go down through here, it changes. So it goes 7 to 90. So that's a couple of thousandths deeper. 8, 9. 11, 11, 5, 11, 5, 11, 12. I'm just reading the thousandths, so we go from 7.5 to 12. That's our deepest measurement, so that dips down. Now I will note that right here, there is some wear in the top, so that may not be a super accurate measurement, but like I said, we'll work it out. This side is worn more than this side. This one goes from 75 is the lowest, basically 9.8, so just say 10. So not as much of a dip in this side. My game plan here is we're going to start scraping this out. So to kind of fix this problem, what we're going to be using is a straight edge here as a reference surface. This has been checked out on the surface plate. This is a flat surface that's been scraped in, and we can then use this as a master to compare the flatness here. So we'll bring this in, we'll come into that, we'll blue it up, we'll find the high spots, and we'll start scraping it down until we get a plane from one end to the other. But wait, there's more. Not only do we have to get a flat plane, we need to come in here and make measurements, and it needs to be basically the same height from the top of this to the bottom down here. That will make sure it's running parallel to everything. Again, this top surface is my reference surface. This was pretty much an original machine surface on this part. And, again, there's arguably a little bit of wear in here, but for the most part, the wear is all going down here because this is not normally a rubbing surface. There should be clearance in there. Reality, you can tell there's a little bit of some rubbing going on, but we'll measure down, and because all this was machined originally, this surface should be parallel to the ways, or in the same plane as the ways, so that should be what we're going to be trying to go back to. All right, let's get in here. We're going to blue this thing up, and I think what I'll do is like I always do when I start scraping an unknown surface, I'm just going to come in here with my scraper, and we're just going to put a crosshatch pattern on it, scraping pattern from one end to the other, and then we'll blue it up and start going from there. And I fully expect that when we blue it up, we're going to see it high on the ends. There's going to be a belly here in the middle. We're going to have to scrape these down until we get that flat surface. And again, we'll have to measure it and maybe do some step scraping to get it flat. Once this side's done, we'll do the same thing over here. And the only difference is that we will make sure that when we get done, we have a flat plane, but the measurements are the same as whatever this side is. This is the one with the most wear, so we will, whatever it comes out to be, that's what we'll do over here. And eventually we'll decide if we need to deck the top of this off a little bit for clearance, or we could put some turkite up underneath our cross slide to get some clearance if necessary when it's all said and done. We'll get to that later on though. I'm kind of jumping ahead and getting ahead of myself. Let's start doing some scraping. I've got my saddle here kind of clamped down to the table. I just put a 2x4 over here, put a carriage bolt down through the table and just kind of screwed it up from the bottom. And I got this sitting on some 4x4 blocks because there's a little hump up underneath this that won't let it sit flat. It is sitting on its ways now, so it is pretty flat across here. Flat enough to do what we need to do. Typically when I'm doing this, I'm kind of working on the corner of my table. I want to do my scraping in 45-degree angles. So, I'll come in there this way and then I'll come in there this way. And being on the corner of the table, it gives me easy access to both sides. And like I mentioned earlier, to start with, we're just going to put a blind scraping pattern on here. I'm going to be using my Biax power scraper. I've got a blade in here with a pretty large radius. I want to be taking a pretty wide cut right now. We're roughing out. And I've got a pretty long stroke length on the scraper as well, so that I'm really taking out a bunch of metal right now. We're roughing. As we get closer to the finish, we'll use a tool with a more smaller radius, which will give us a smaller cutting area, and we'll shorten the stroke length to kind of fine tune things. But let's go ahead and put a pattern in here. I'm just going to come across this and scraping. I'm making individual lines. I call a line here, and I got individual scrape marks. They're not overlapping one another. It's not perfect, but we're just kind of, not the end of the world if you do, but that's kind of what we're shooting for, is those individual lines and individual scrape marks. Now I'm going to come out, do the 45 degrees in the other direction. This kind of makes a checkerboard appearance on the part. I'm kind of breaking up the previous straight marks as I'm going across. I'm not digging any holes. Brush my chips out, and then I'm going to take a stone here, and that'll just get any burrs off of that. And now we'll get our straight edge, we'll glue it up, and check it out here. Got some spotting ink here on a little foam roller, and we're just going to put a nice little layer of this on the bottom of the straight edge, and then that will be used to transfer over there. Now take our straight edge. I like to just kind of go into the back of the dovetail, kind of drop it down flat. We'll rub it back and forth, make sure we're staying flat on there. Pull it off. Yeah, and start to see where we're touching and where we're not. And I'm actually getting fairly good contact all down through here, so that's kind of surprising me a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and start knocking this thing back. I'm just going to kind of hit my blue spots, and we'll go from there. It's telling me it's rubbing flat, but I know from my measurements that I'm high down here on this end, or this end is up. So it's telling me it's actually in a pretty flat plane, but I know from my measurements that we're high down here, so I'm going to probably do some step scraping to kind of drop this end down. When I say step scraping, we'll come in here and I'm going to probably go from about halfway up because we're making good contact there. Down here it's kind of spotty, so I'll scrape all the way up to there. I'll scrape about 2/3 up to there. I'll scrape about 1/3 up to there, or maybe do quarters or something, but I'll just do them in steps. So I go 3/4. In fact, let me just get a Sharpie pen and I'll mark them on there. So we're going to call that half. I'll half it again. So we'll go scrape to there. Or actually, what I'll do is I'll scrape to here, I'll scrape to here, I'll scrape to here, and then I'll scrape to here. That's 4 passes, but this side gets 4 scrape times, this one gets 3, this one gets 2, this one gets 1. So as you can see, it's kind of bringing this end down. So anyway, we'll come in here and do this. And I think I'm going to do cross hatches because I know we got a lot of material to take out. All right, so now I'm going to go up to this line. This line. Now I go all the way up to here. I'm going to take some Windex glass cleaner and just clean this up, get that ink out of there. And we will take our stone again. And I'm going to blue it up, but I'm also going to get my depth micrometer out and start trying to get it where it's the same height from one end to the other. And we'll come in. Blew it up. And it's making, again, up here pretty good, down here more spotty, but let me get some depth. Like I said, right now I'm more worried about the getting the depth of this kind of parallel to the top before I start go worry about getting it scraped in for a pattern. All right, so when I'm reading this, I'm just reading the number. It's 9. That's all I'm looking at. It's relative. I know they're going to be within a thou or two, but we're in the range here. So I'm just going to, in fact, let me get a Sharpie, and I'm just going to write 9 right here. And then we'll come up here, get a measurement, and I'm going to call this 95 or 9.5. I'm going to call this 11, 9.5. All right, so you can see we got from 9 to 12, so about 3/1000ths to take off of this end, 2.5, 1, half, 0, 0, and then we go back to 2.5 down here on the other end. So again, I'm right now I'm just trying to get it all kind of in the same plane. So I think what we'll do here is we're going to do another round of step scraping, but because that one's pretty close, I think we're just going to kind of, in fact, let me kind of figure out. All right, looks like it's kind of transitioning right about in here. So I'm going to do another round of step scraping. between those 4 points right there. And I think I'm also just kind of do some step scraping up here, and we're not going to touch this area in here at all. All right, let me get the scraper out. I'm going to do another round, and we'll come back. So I've done several rounds of step scraping. I've got this pretty well measuring within about a thou and a half from any point in here. So now I'm going to really start going more toward the straight edge. We'll come in here, get up into that dovetail, and rub it out. And you can see the high spots. And we're going to start scraping, concentrating on those high spots until we get good contact from one end to the other. So I'm seeing kind of back there in the back over here, which that's hard to kind of get up into that back. So I just didn't scrape as much up in there. A little bit of contact in here, not so much out on the end. So we'll just start working our way down. Just hitting those blue spots right now, but I'm kind of focusing on areas because we're still not from one end to the other. So we're still kind of bringing things into plane, but I'm only focusing on the areas that are blued up. And I see my blue spots in here again. Just rinse and repeat it this time, guys. I'm going to just work this way down. What I'm shooting for is I want to see a blue pattern from one to the other and not any big holes in there. Right now we've got some pretty big holes, so we got some areas to bring down to kind of straighten that out. But we're getting there. I'll bring you back in a little bit. So guys, I'm kind of at a point where I'm ready to make a little change to my operations to try to improve this out. Now, a lot of people probably say, well, that's good enough, Keith. You've got, covers from the end to end. Yeah, there's a little bit of a void here, a little bit on the ends, but where the cross slide's going to be doing most of its running, you got good contact. I've been taking a wide cut and a long cut, doing more roughing. Now I want to try to do more finishing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change to a cutter, again, with a tighter radius. So when this goes in there, the width of the cut is going to be smaller, and I'm also going to shorten the length of the stroke on my scraper, and I'm really just going to concentrate only trying to hit the blue spots, try to just bring those down and hopefully kind of pick up some of these other areas in here. Instead of taking more of a wide, hey, we're just removing metal, now I'm starting to get in here where we're going to really start just focusing just on the blue spots and not taking those wider area hits in there. So let me get this set up on my scraper, and we'll make another pass. I'm only just concentrating on those individual blue points here, still making kind of individual lines, although my lines are shorter, and individual straight marks. I don't want them to overlap on one another. When I go to doing this kind of scraping, it really kind of slows things down, but this is where you get your precision. And again, and I don't know that I actually have mentioned it in this video, but I know I have in others. When scraping, the concept here is we don't want to, I talk about having a perfect plane, but it's not a perfectly flat surface as in you came out off of a surface grinder and you have everything in one plane. When scraping like this, what we end up with is the high points are all on a plane, but you've got all these little valleys down in between them, and that gives you clearance for oil to go into, and that also keeps you from having such a large surface area coming in contact with one another. You know, if you have two round surfaces and you put them together, they'll stick, kind of like gauge blocks. You ring them together, they'll stick to one another. On a dovetail slide like this, we don't want it to stick. We want it to slide. So we're reducing the surface area, but having that top area, again, in a nice plane that is flat. So that's what we're after. All right, let me tune that up and we'll do a couple more passes here and I think we'll have this side knocked out. So I've been working on this for a few minutes, probably made 6 or 7 passes fairly quickly. I mean, probably less than 5 minutes per pass, just going here, hitting the high spots, wipe it down, stone it, blew it, hit the high spots, rinse and repeat. But anyway, I'm pretty happy with this. What we've got here is you got coverage from one end to the other. There's no major areas in here where we've got, you know, big voids or anything like that. And you've got points of contact. You've got points of contact separated by points where there's not contact. And that is ideally what we're after in a good scraped surface. Again, we've got place for the oil to go. We don't have solid contact. We got points of contact, and it's spread out fairly evenly up and down through there. I'm very happy with that one. I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to get out my depth micrometer. I just want to check and make sure that we're still level from one end to the other. Make sure I don't have any major problems there that I need to go in and straighten out. And if that checks out, we're going to go around and start on the other side. All right, I've come in here now with my depth micrometer and measure from one end to the other. One thing I will note that I did a little bit different is I got to noticing that I had some high spots in here, and you could tell a little bit of marks up on the top, and I got the feeling it was a little bit rough. I took a stone, one of my precision ground flat stones, and stoned this down, and I think that when I was measuring this before, I had some burrs in here that I was measuring over the top, and it was kind of giving me a little bit different reading. So the readings are a little bit different now, but actually I trust this a little bit more. Basically 11, 11, 11, 11, 11 and a half, 12, 12, 11, 11. So this is showing being a little bit deeper here based on the measurements. However, the straight edge showed it was heavier here. So that's telling me there's probably something going on with this top edge because that is a flat plane. Bottom line though, from the smallest number to the tallest number, 1,000th over, 15 inches, I can live with that. I think we're good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flip this thing around and we're going to do the same thing on the other side, get it flat, and also want my measurements on this one on the depth to be around 11 or 12. Right now we're at 7.5 to 9. I'm at about a 10 up here. So we're going to have to take this end was worn a little bit more, and again, this is the side closest to the headstock, so this had more pressure on it, so this one was a little bit lower. I'm going to have to work a little bit to get this brought down to the same height over here and also in a flat plane. All right, I'm going to flip this around and we'll get started on the other side. Same process. Probably won't go in as much detail, but we'll show you a few things along the way. All right, I just thought I'd real briefly show, I didn't start from the beginning on this side. I started by just measuring the depth, and I had, over here we're between 11s and 12s. On this side, I started out at like a 7 up here, and I think I went to a 10 on the depth, kind of in this area. And I did some just blinds, step scraping, did a couple of passes, making some measurements until I got my depths kind of somewhat uniform. And so right now we're running between 9 and 10 on this side. And we need to be between 11 and 12, but I got more scraping to do, so it's going to come on down some more as we bring this in, but I wanted to get it close. This is the first time I put the blue on here, and you can see I'm only hitting in just a couple of places. That's not uncommon. I was doing it blind. I wasn't using blue. This is not a problem. The good news is that my blue is hitting pretty much in my 10s, which is my high spots. So we're going to start taking those down. Now we're paying attention where the blue is and not so much the depth. I think the depth will kind of work itself out as we go down. We'll check it as we get close to the end, but I think we're going to be fine. So I'm going to start. Again, I'm roughing right now. I'm just kind of hitting these areas that are blue. I'm hitting them pretty hard and in wide areas because we're trying to take those down until we start picking up more contact in here. And anyway, I just wanted to kind of show you where I'm starting from. Very little contact from one end to the other. You know, we're within a thou according to the depth micrometer, but the straight edge tells the story better as far as flatness is concerned. So let's I'm going to continue on here. Same process. We're just going to hit the blue areas, scrape it, re-blue it, and scrape it and re-blue it until we get contact from one end to the other, which is what we're after. So just want to kind of show how fast things can start changing here. I've made 2 passes, you know, one in one direction, one in the other direction, just hitting the blue and bluing it between each pass. And you know, now, you know, we're nowhere close to being finished here, but I've got coverage from here to here real good, and from here out kind of, I say real good, that's not super good, but I mean that's probably 30% coverage, and we probably got maybe 15% coverage from here to here. That's just in 2 passes. So you can see how quickly things can progress. It looks like we got a long ways to go, but it's often a lot closer than it appears. You know, 10,000ths of an inch can make a difference when scraping. I'm going to continue on until we get it blued up and got good coverage. You know, I'm going for somewhere around 70-80% coverage, probably 75% coverage is usually good enough for something like this, so that's what we're going to shoot for. And just like that, I'm happy with the coverage there, end to end. You know, we've got pretty uniform coverage from one end to the other. I'm guessing 70-75% contact, which is what we want. All in all, I'm happy with that. I'm going to clean this up. I want to get my depth measurements and just check those real quick. But I think we're going to have at least the bottoms of this done. Next, we need to work on the inside of the dovetails. So on my depth measurements, 13, 13, 13 up to here. We go up to 12 up on the end up here. So not perfect, but again, the other side is very similar. It's a little bit lighter on this end than it is on this end. I will say that my numbers on this side are just a tad bit deeper. We were basically 11s and 12s on this side. We're 12s and 13s over here. Not a huge difference. And, you know, honestly, guys, this side over here, remember, it's going to wear as we're wearing in. So as this machine is used, this side's going to wear first. So it's going to actually go from slightly above into wear and then slightly down. And that's an ideal situation when you're scraping, is you kind of sometimes want to think about where your wear is going to be. And if you've got just a little bit of air in the side where it's going to wear in and then back out, rather than being perfectly in and then getting farther and farther out. So this is kind of a strategy that some scrapers use to kind of keep things in tolerance longer. Now in my case, guys, this is how it turned out, but it's not a bad thing. It's the point that I'm making. So there we go. All right, I'm going to get in here and start working on these dovetails. And this is going to be, on dovetails, I tend to hand scrape rather than power scrape. It's just, there's just a short area to work in. It's hard to get that scraper all the way into that back corner on these dovetails. So I tend to just do it by hand rather than power scraping them. And let's work towards this, getting this going here. Well, guys, I think that's going to be a wrap for this particular episode. We got the flats done. We'll come back and work on these dovetails in the next episode that we cover on this. I'm going to have to make a little fixture to properly hold this while I'm scraping it to make it a little bit easier. Really hard to scrape upside down at an angle, so basically you can reposition your work and make your life a lot easier. But to do that, I'm going to have to get creative and come up with a little way to mount this and hold it to make my life easier. So we're going to work on that coming up and get this done. I'll just give a little bit of brief, kind of looking at what we got to do, but we got to come in here. We'll start by getting one side flat from one end to the other using the straight edge. We use the dovetail on the straight edge, come in there and check that. And then we will come in here and we'll probably come in here next and measure across pins again. And if need be, do some step scraping in here to get the width the same from one to the other, and then scrape for flatness across that. We want these two to be parallel to one another. And I know from my measurements that they're worn into a little bit of a belly here in the center. So, and then once that's done, you have to take the whole thing back over to the lathe and check to see how square this dovetail, the whole slide is compared to the ways on the machine. And if that's out, we'll have to scrape the bottom of the saddle to kind of get it into proper alignment. We'll see. Probably will require some tweaking, but maybe hopefully not a lot. But for today, that's going to be a wrap. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Those thumbs up, those comments, they really help out a lot. I really appreciate you guys to do that. Big, huge thank you to those who support the site financially through Patreon, PayPal, and YouTube memberships. That helps out a lot as well. And with that, guys, we're going to sign off. Catch you on the next video. Again, as always, thanks for watching.